Hey guys! Tonight we start in the drafty stone heart of a castle that's seen better winters, the kind where even the rats have packed up and moved to warmer walls. You can practically hear your stomach protesting before you even open your eyes. The distant rumble from the great hall's hearth, now long cold, seems to echo your own hunger. You're one of the countless servants, anonymous hands in the background of history, who's about to find out what happens when the grain bin's empty, the stew pot runs dry, and the Lord's promises start tasting a lot like boiled water. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and local time. I want to see who's out there listening in the quiet of the night. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to the muffled shuffle of feet in the corridor, and the clatter of an empty ladle against an emptier pot, a sound that, under siege or in the depths of winter, feels almost like an insult. The air smells faintly of smoke and boiled cabbage from 3 days ago, but mostly of dust and resignation. You run your hand across the wooden table where flour once dusted everything like snowfall. Now the surface is bare, rough, and silent. The larders stand open like tombs. In the corners, sacks that once bulged with barley slump inward, defeated. You try to remember when the last delivery came through the castle gates, maybe before the snows, or maybe before the neighboring village started flying the wrong banner. History remembers the knights, but not the scullions who had to figure out how to stretch a meal for 50 on the leftovers of 10. You pick up the ledger scratched in charcoal by the head cook. She's been counting down meals, not days, and the numbers are starting to look like a countdown to despair. There's a line scrawled in the margin, "No flour left, consider dogs," followed by a blot of ink where the quill must have hesitated. You laugh, a dry sound that doesn't quite reach humor, and mutter, "Maybe we'll start with the Lord's hunting hounds." It's a joke, but like most medieval jokes, it hides a truth everyone's thinking. The castle's hierarchy still holds, at least for now. Meals go first to the Lord and his household, then to the guards, then, if anything remains, to the invisible backbone of the place, you and your fellow servants. Yet tonight, even the Lord's table might be looking thin. Rumor travels faster than warmth through cold stone, and whispers say the Lord's wife fainted at dinner when she realized the pigeon pie was actually made of something that never flew. You step outside into the courtyard, your breath fogging the air, and watch the snow piling against the walls. The drawbridge has been raised for weeks, ever since raiders were spotted beyond the woods, which means no trade, no supplies, and no chance of sneaking out for anything edible that isn't nailed down. The chickens are gone, the goats picked clean, and the pigeons, once convenient messenger and snack, have mysteriously disappeared. You could boil your boots, someone jokes beside you. It's Thomas, the stable hand, holding up a cracked piece of leather like a prize. If you soak it long enough in ale, it almost tastes like stew. He grins, and you grin back, because what else is there to do? Hunger makes philosophers out of fools, and comedians out of the doomed. Inside, the kitchen fires are little more than coals, guarded like relics. Every spark feels precious enough to bless. The head cook, Mistress Alwyn, stands over the cauldron with arms folded, her face set in the grim patience of someone who survived more winters than she cares to count. "We'll make do," she says, as if the words themselves could conjure food. Her idea of making do has already included stretching gruel with sawdust, flavoring soup with onion peel, and slicing yesterday's crusts into imaginary portions for today. It's not malice, just mathematics. There's one historical record that mentions a castle under siege in 1316, where the servants began grinding straw into meal. The chronicler wrote that they ate the winter itself. It's not hard to imagine. You remember last night's supper, if you can call it that. A thin stew so translucent you could read the bottom of the bowl through it. "At least it's warm," Alwyn had said, ladling it out like liquid hope. Warm counts for a lot when your stomach's empty. Warm in this place feels like victory. As evening falls, you sit near the hearth and listen to the wind press against the shutters. The fire pops like a tired heartbeat. Someone starts humming, a lullaby meant for children, though everyone here is far too old for illusions. It's strange how quickly hunger rearranges the castle's priorities. The gossip that once filled the hallways, who kissed who behind the wine barrels, which knight fell asleep at his post, has been replaced by the practical poetry of survival. Which roots can be boiled, which herbs dull hunger, which scraps might be quietly hidden before the steward takes inventory. You've heard that in some castles, servants kept secret caches of grain in the walls, tiny acts of rebellion and foresight that could mean the difference between life and starvation. There's even one chronicled rumor, probably exaggerated, about a kitchen maid who invented stone soup by convincing her lord that a magic pebble could flavor water, then slipped in handfuls of stolen lentils while no one watched. Scholars still debate whether that's apocryphal or an early example of creative leadership. You like to think she was real. She'd fit right in here. As night deepens, you catch yourself staring at the fire's glow and imagining smells that aren't there. Roasted mutton, buttered bread, apples stewed in honey. Your brain, desperate for comfort, starts cooking with memories. Someone coughs behind you, and the sound echoes like a sermon, reminding you that hunger isn't the only danger. Without food, everyone weakens. Without strength, sickness moves in. The castle physician's herbs are nearly gone, and the walls meant to protect now feel like the ribs of a giant beast slowly starving around you. You think of the monks in their stone monasteries who survived famines on nettle soup and prayer, and you wonder if the castle's priest will start blessing empty bowls next. Tomorrow, Mistress Alwyn says, breaking the silence, we'll check the lower storerooms. There might be something left. You don't have the heart to tell her you've already checked. The only things down there are a broken butter churn, 2 mice, and a barrel of salt that's half rock and half legend. Still, you nod. Hope is its own kind of meal. And in the stillness that follows, you can hear the castle breathing with you, slow, heavy, hungry. The walls hold their secrets. The fire sighs low, and your stomach growls in answer, a duet between stone and flesh that will last until someone finds a way to turn nothing into supper. You wake before dawn to the soft scrape of a wooden spoon against iron, a sound that has become the castle's morning hymn. In the half-light of the kitchen, a thin steam rises from a pot that's doing its best to pretend it contains breakfast. You approach, rubbing your hands together for warmth rather than hygiene. No one here has seen soap in weeks, and peer inside. What greets you isn't stew, or porridge, or even soup. It's gruel. The kind of gruel that makes water feel smug about its flavor profile. Mistress Alwyn, ever the optimist, stands nearby muttering calculations under her breath. 1 scoop per head, 2 if they're sick, none if they're already in the chapel. You try to smile. Gruel, in theory, is a dish of humility, ground grain boiled in water, flavored if you're lucky. In practice, it's edible despair, served warm. The first spoonful slides down like regret, thickened just enough to suggest the memory of oats. Better than nothing, Thomas mumbles from across the table, though the look on his face says he's not sure which side of that comparison won. The castle has officially entered the stretching phase, that desperate culinary period where creativity replaces ingredients. Someone suggests adding crushed beans to bulk it up, but the beans are long gone. Another servant, a girl barely 16, offers to grind straw into powder like she heard they did in a northern siege decades ago. Adds fiber, she says brightly, as if anyone here has digestive optimism left. Alwen nods. Serious. Do it. At this point, anything that keeps a man upright counts as food. You find yourself stirring the pot, watching it bubble sluggishly. The smell is faintly earthy, half grain, half smoke. You think of the chroniclers who wrote about the Great Famine of 1315, when Europe's skies turned cruel, and even the wealthy ate horseflesh. They called it God's appetite. You can almost hear them laughing through parchment at your own meager attempt to cheat hunger. A stray thought crosses your mind. If historians ever write about you, it'll be under a chapter called Culinary Tragedies of the Unimportant. You ladle out bowls one by one, passing them around. The kitchen goes quiet except for the scrape of spoons and the occasional cough. No one talks much during meals anymore. Conversation wastes energy. The firelight flickers against faces drawn thin as parchment, eyes heavy but still alert, because hunger sharpens the world until even a breadcrumb looks luminous. A mouse scurries across the floor and vanishes behind a crate, and for the briefest second, everyone's gaze follows it with a shared, unspoken thought. "Do you remember butter?" someone asks suddenly. It's a strange question, and for a moment you're not sure whether to laugh or cry. Butter, soft, golden, once so ordinary it was almost invisible. You nod slowly, remembering the smell that used to fill this same kitchen, the hiss of it melting in a pan. Now even the word feels decadent, like whispering a forbidden spell. Mistress Alwen clears her throat. "Less remembering, more eating," she says gently, but she's staring into her bowl like she's conjuring ghosts too. Outside, snow drifts against the shutters, muffling the sounds of a waking castle. The guards will get their rations soon. Slightly thicker gruel with a sliver of salted pork, if fortune's feeling flirtatious. You used to envy them, but now even they walk slower, shoulders hunched, eyes dulled. You can tell who's been sneaking extra bites by how fast they smile when the steward walks in. The steward himself, Lord Reynard, is a walking equation of famine management. Stern, meticulous, terrifyingly thin. He enters now, cloak sweeping the flagstones like an accusation. "Inventory," he announces, as if the word itself could summon abundance. He opens the ledger, tracing rows of diminishing numbers with a trembling finger. Barley, 5 sacks gone. Oats, 3 remaining, spoiled. Peas, half barrel. Wine, 2 bottles. He pauses. Who drank the wine? Silence. Somewhere a spoon clinks. Then, meekly, Thomas raises a hand. "Used it to clean wounds, sir." The steward narrows his eyes. "Your wounds or someone else's?" "Mine, mostly." "Wasteful," Renard mutters, writing something down. "Next time use water. Or prayer." You can't tell if he's joking. You think about how strange it is that starvation doesn't look dramatic. It's quiet, creeping, procedural. It doesn't howl. It whispers. It convinces you that you're fine until one morning you forget what fine even felt like. You finish your bowl and set it aside. It's empty, yet the smell lingers, tauntingly faint. Mistress Alwyn starts collecting them for washing. No one dares waste even the trace of grain left clinging to the sides. She pours boiling water into the pot, scrapes it clean, and mutters about making another batch for the infirmary. You offer to help carry it, if only to keep moving, to trick your body into thinking work is strength and not just stubbornness. On the way down the corridor, you pass the chapel where candles flicker weakly. The priest is praying over the sick again, voice hoarse. "Bread of life," he says, "grant us your mercy." The irony hits hard. You imagine Christ himself appearing here, looking into the pot and sighing. You call that bread. You bite back a laugh that feels dangerously close to hysteria. Upstairs, in the Lord's hall, the great fireplace burns brighter. Fuel is one thing the nobility never runs out of. You glance up and catch the faint scent of roasted something. Not meat, exactly. Maybe roots, or stale bread fried in grease, but it's enough to make your stomach tighten. The divide between us and them has never been clearer than through scent. You carry the pot back to the kitchen, where Alwyn is already setting aside a crust she's found a real piece of bread, old but edible. She breaks it in half, hands you a piece, and smiles faintly. "You earned this," she says. You take a bite, and for a moment everything stops. It's dry, hard as stone, probably older than the season itself, but to your tongue it might as well be cake. You close your eyes and savor it. Funny, You murmur, "How good survival tastes." Alwyn chuckles, then sighs. Wait until you're scraping moss off the walls. That's when you start missing gruel. You both laugh quietly, and for a few seconds the kitchen feels alive again. There's a kind of grim magic in shared misery. It binds tighter than feasts ever could. By the time the next batch is ready, the light outside has shifted from silver to gray. You can hear the creak of the drawbridge chains in the distance, ghostly and unused. Somewhere beyond those walls, the world might still be eating bread, but in here, the castle has turned inward, self-consuming, feeding on memory. You take one last look at the pot, now half empty again, and whisper under your breath, "Tomorrow may be thicker." The words hang there like a promise no one believes, but everyone needs. Somewhere above, the Lord sneezes, and you can't help thinking, half in jest, half in prayer, may it shake loose a few crumbs from his table. You crouch in the dim corners of the kitchen, the firelight failing to reach the farthest shelves, and for a moment you consider that the shadows might be hiding more than just pots and broken ladles. They might be hiding life itself. A rustle echoes from behind a sack, and your heart jumps, only to find a rat, large and sleek, skittering across the stone floor. You pause, breath caught between disgust and fascination, because in a castle where the larders are empty, rats aren't pests, they're potential dinner. Thomas nudges you with a toe, and whispers conspiratorially, "Remember the stories from the siege last winter? They said men roasted rats over coals, seasoned with nothing but courage." You blink, imagining the scent, smoky, earthy, and terrifyingly edible. You've heard that the chroniclers of medieval Europe sometimes described servants supplementing their diets with vermin during famines, a fact that most history books brush over, preferring tales of knights and feasts. Still, here it feels plausible, almost practical. A raven caws from the battlements above, and you wonder if it too is judging your hunger, or worse, plotting to swoop down for scraps before you can claim them. Hunger sharpens your senses. Every movement, every glint in the shadows becomes a choice between survival and disgust. You tiptoe along the walls, gathering what remnants of grain might have fallen into cracks or been overlooked during the day, and marvel at how inventive desperation makes you. Someone once joked that medieval cooks could turn a broomstick into a soup base if the circumstances demanded it. You're starting to believe them. Your fingers brush against a small pouch tucked behind the spice rack, long-forgotten peppercorns, dusty but intact. You lift it reverently, aware that to your stomach, even a single spice can feel like luxury. As you return to the central kitchen, you notice the others whispering. A debate has erupted over the ethics of scavenging from the castle's less savory corners. A rat is a rat, one argues, but a rat with a touch of stale bread is dinner. Another shakes her head. "I don't know if I can eat it. Not yet." You recognize that feeling. Your stomach might obey necessity, but your mind protests with the eloquence of someone writing letters that will never be sent. Yet the survival instinct is persuasive. It speaks in growls, in hollow echoes where laughter should be. You remember an old tale of a kitchen maid who supposedly caught a mouse, baptized it, and ate it anyway, claiming she was technically following the spirit of the law. Scholars argue whether it's apocryphal or a literal survival anecdote. But in here, it doesn't matter. The line between legend and necessity blurs. You glance at the pantry shelves stacked with dusty jars, some containing pickled vegetables, others long-forgotten preserves, and consider how even spoiled food becomes precious. A mouse darts across your path again, and instinct urges you to trap it. But something stops you. A pang of sympathy, or perhaps the recognition that in this hall of hunger, ethics are malleable. Outside, the wind rattles the battlements and carries the faint cry of more ravens, scavengers of a different kind. You've seen them swoop near the kitchens, cawing sharply, eyeing the scraps that drop from the Lord's table, and you can't help but envy their freedom. Hunger makes you imaginative. You recall reading that in some sieges, medieval servants were said to fashion small skewers to roast rats, or even to trap them in the larders to save for later, creating a kind of perverse pantry of vermin. Some historians debate the literal truth of these accounts, but here and now they feel entirely credible. You push on, inspecting the cracks in the stone floor and walls, searching for anything the mice might have overlooked. There's a pile of grain, nearly invisible beneath a loose flagstone, and your hands tremble with triumph as you scoop it up. Even a handful feels monumental. Someone nudges you. A fellow servant, cheeks flushed with the exertion of scavenging. She holds a small, scrawny rat between her fingers, debating whether the oven is hot enough. You glance at her, and she meets your eyes with the kind of silent communication that hunger cultivates, shared dread, shared hope. You know this is the sort of moment that binds people together, or frays nerves beyond repair. She offers the rat to you with a nervous laugh, and you can't decide whether to refuse out of principle or accept out of necessity. You remember the head cook murmuring that sometimes when rations run thin, even the most steadfast of servants has to negotiate with their conscience. That's exactly what you're doing now. Around you the kitchen smells of smoke, dust, and the faint hint of something meaty, possibly imagined. You stir the thin gruel in the central pot, imagining it mixed with a tiny pinch of vermin meat, just enough to taste survival without fully committing to the thought. The room feels alive in its own twisted way. Shadows flicker across the walls, and the fire pops like a heartbeat, almost as if the castle itself is acknowledging the unusual menu. You hear someone sigh, then laugh quietly, the kind of laugh that tastes like fear and relief all at once. In the corner, a stray pigeon sits, blinking cautiously, a living relic of better days. You think about how, in some historical sieges, pigeons were plucked, roasted, and sometimes even preserved in honey, a combination that sounds absurd until the hunger kicks in. Scholars still debate whether such practices were common or exceptional. But the image sparks something in your imagination, a vision of the castle as both theater and battlefield, where food, morale, and survival intertwine. You decide to leave the pigeon for now, knowing that some moral victories are worth preserving. You pause, inhaling deeply, letting the mix of wood smoke, dust, and faint animal musk settle into memory. Hunger sharpens not only senses but awareness. Every creak, every scuttle, every distant caw feels meaningful. You realize that tonight's menu is more than nourishment. It's a lesson in adaptability, creativity, and the strange ethics that only desperation can inspire. As the fire dims slightly, you make a mental note to check the far cellar later, where hidden sacks or overlooked scraps might provide another meager victory. Thomas shuffles closer, holding a twig like a tiny spear, whispering, "If we get lucky, maybe one of those rats will cooperate." You grin, half in horror, half in camaraderie, knowing that shared adversity turns the grotesque into humor. The kitchen settles into quiet once more, punctuated by occasional rustles and the low pop of dying embers. You sit back, spoon in hand, contemplating the surreal dance between survival, morality, and imagination. Somewhere, a raven screeches, a reminder that even the skies judge your choices. You dip the spoon into the gruel again, tasting warmth, water, and the faint spice of courage. In that simple act, you feel a small private victory. You are alive, still thinking, still negotiating the delicate balance of sustenance and conscience. And as the candlelight flickers across stone walls, you realize that sometimes the most remarkable feasts are those of memory, imagination, and the daring hope that the next meal will be slightly less desperate. You slip through the narrow doorway behind the kitchen, the hinges groaning as if warning you to turn back, but curiosity and hunger push you forward. Beneath the thick stone walls of the castle, in shadowed nooks that rarely see sun, lie the secret gardens, small stubborn patches of green that survive despite frost, neglect, and the occasional wandering goat. You crouch low, brushing aside frozen leaves and brittle stems, discovering a stubborn patch of onions peeking through the soil like tiny sentinels of hope. The smell of earth is rich, intoxicating, a stark contrast to the pervasive smoke and ash of the kitchen above. You carefully dig around a root, mindful not to disturb more than necessary, because every bulb could mean the difference between a night of gnawing at gruel or the faint sweetness of real nourishment. Here, in these hidden plots, the castle's servants practiced a clandestine art of survival. You remember the stories whispered among the older hands, how during winters of famine, small gardens sprouted in unlikely places, behind loose stones, beneath floorboards, even in empty barrels that once held wine. Scholars debate whether these gardens were widespread or isolated, but the fact that a single onion could feed a family for a day makes the distinction almost irrelevant. You tug one free, its pungent aroma making your stomach tighten in gratitude and relief. You tuck it carefully into your apron, imagining it chopped and added to the thin gruel that dominates your meals. Nearby, a sprig of parsley pokes through the frost, its green so vibrant it almost feels like a taunt. You pluck it, savoring the bright, bittersweet hint of life that no amount of kitchen sorrow can extinguish. As you move deeper, you discover a clandestine lettuce patch, leaves curled and frostbitten, but edible if boiled or roasted over the tiny embers you might find. The soil is damp. The air smells of history and perseverance. You wonder which servant first planted this secret garden, risking punishment for the hope of a better meal. Someone somewhere decided that even in a castle's darkest winter, life would persist, green, stubborn, and resilient. You imagine their hands, small and calloused, slipping seeds into hidden earth while lords slept, oblivious to the quiet revolution beneath their feet. A small robin hops among the stones, pecking curiously at the soil, unafraid of you, and you can't help but smile. It's a tiny witness to the ingenuity of those who refuse to starve quietly. You gather a few more vegetables, careful to leave some for the next hungry hand. Each bite, when it comes later, will taste like rebellion, resourcefulness, and the defiance of nature's cruelty. You remember a peculiar anecdote about a castle in northern England, where during a harsh famine, servants cultivated tiny mustard and herb gardens behind the walls, claiming that the scent alone was enough to uplift spirits. Historians debate whether the mustard truly grew or whether it was an imaginative embellishment, but as you inhale the earthy aroma of your own secret harvest, you find the story entirely believable. You pause to examine a patch of kale, leaves curled and frost-scarred, noting that even in near-death conditions, life finds a way. You pluck one and tuck it beside the onions, imagining a stew that combines warmth, texture, and defiance against scarcity. A thin layer of ice crusts the soil in places, and you break it carefully, remembering the old superstition that frost on herbs blesses the eater with protection against winter maladies. You laugh softly at the absurdity, knowing that superstitions, like gardens, grow stubbornly in these corners of the world. As you work, you notice faint scratches along the stone, a kind of tally, marking what has been taken and what remains. Perhaps another servant, before you, counted harvests, or perhaps they left these marks for future generations, a breadcrumb trail of survival wisdom. You add your own scratches lightly, feeling a quiet kinship with unknown hands across time. The air is crisp, scented faintly of earth and lingering snow, and the sound of distant wind through the battlements above reminds you that the castle is a living, breathing organism. Every hidden garden, every root and leaf is a testament to ingenuity and the human will to endure. You dig a small hole for a carrot, covering it again to protect it from frost and prying eyes, knowing that patience is as important as appetite. These gardens beneath the walls are more than food. They are a statement, a secret resistance, a tiny miracle of life amid stone and hunger. You pause, letting the quiet settle around you, the echo of distant footsteps reminding you that above, the castle hums with concern, diligence, and the faint rustle of parchment in the Lord's study. Here, in this secret underworld, only survival matters. You tuck the gathered vegetables carefully into your apron, feeling the weight of sustenance and responsibility. Each step back toward the kitchen is measured, deliberate, ensuring that nothing is lost and nothing noticed. You pass the flickering torches along the corridors, the walls casting long wavering shadows that feel protective rather than threatening. In the kitchen, you set down the bounty, and Mistress Alwyn raises an eyebrow, approving yet unspoken in her judgment. You chop, boil, and add the vegetables to the gruel, transforming what was previously thin and lifeless into something that smells like hope. The kitchen fills with the faint, earthy aroma of onions, parsley, and kale, mingling with the smoke and ash, a quiet rebellion against the hunger that has stalked every stone of the castle. You watch the servants around you, sharing small glances, knowing that tonight's meal will be marginally better, more nourishing, and a little taste of victory. Hunger remains, but for a moment it is tempered by ingenuity, green shoots of life, and the secret gardens beneath the walls that whisper resilience with every bite. The night deepens, and the fire flickers, casting dancing shadows on walls that have seen centuries of survival. You bite into a piece of boiled onion, the texture coarse but the flavor intensely satisfying, and for the first time in days, the castle feels less like a tomb and more like a living, breathing world, stitched together with the perseverance of those who refuse to surrender to hunger. You hunch over the large iron cauldron, the flames licking the sides and sending tendrils of smoky warmth into your chilled fingers. In the dim light of the kitchen, bones sit in the water like pale, stubborn reminders of the meals that once were, their marrow a treasure long since stripped from the noble tables. Mistress Alwyn moves deftly, scraping away flecks of dried meat from the edges, whispering instructions as though the bones themselves might rebel if mishandled. You take a long-handled spoon and stir gently, inhaling the rich earthy scent that rises in slow, curling waves. This is survival at its most basic alchemy of hunger, turning nothing into nourishment, and in a strange way, it feels almost sacred. You remember reading that, during the 100 Years' War, besieged castles often relied on bone broth, simmering every scrap of meat and marrow left behind, creating sustenance where none seemed possible. Some scholars argue that accounts of servants boiling bones for weeks are exaggerated. Yet as you watch the dark liquid deepen in color, you understand why even rumors of such practices endure. They are plausible, and desperate times make plausible anything. You drop in a handful of dried herbs, sage, thyme, and a sprig of rosemary from the secret garden beneath the walls, hoping to mask the bitter scent and coax flavor from the otherwise plain liquid. Each stir is careful, deliberate. Even the smallest mistake might ruin the broth and waste precious minutes of warmth and energy. Thomas sidles over, holding a cracked pot, and whispers about a rat skittering near the corner of the kitchen. "Do you think?" he begins, and you shush him, both aware that fear and hunger are dangerous companions. You glance at the bones, noticing one that still holds a fragment of gristle, and scrape it carefully, turning what is left into soup. The marrow is pale, almost chalky, but when stirred into the simmering water, it thickens slightly, giving a hint of body to the otherwise thin broth. You sip cautiously, warmth spreading slowly through your chest. It's not delicious, far from it, but it is sustenance, and in a castle where every meal is a gamble against starvation, sustenance is a victory. You remember the strange story of a medieval kitchen where a servant allegedly invented a rudimentary version of what today might be called bone broth soup, claiming it cured minor illnesses and lifted spirits. Though some historians debate whether the medicinal claims were genuine or mere folklore, you feel that mixture of skepticism and hope now, stirring the cauldron, imagining that the broth might not only fill bellies but ease fears. The kitchen hums quietly around you. Others stir, scrape, and tend to the dying fire. Every sound is magnified: the creak of the floorboards, the hiss of the water, the distant clatter from the pantry where forgotten scraps wait like hidden treasures. You scrape a bone clean, noting the splintered texture, and imagining the hands that carried it from the Lord's table to this cauldron. No one will write about these hands in the chronicles of history, yet their work is as heroic as any knight's charge. You drop another handful of herbs into the broth, watching them wilt, and add a root vegetable or two from the secret garden. The colors blend: pale white of the marrow, earthy green of kale, dull orange of carrot, all dancing in a simmering bath of necessity. You taste again, bland, comforting, the heat seeping into your fingers and toes. Hunger lulls slightly, replaced by a kind of satisfaction that comes only from labor and anticipation combined. As you stir, you notice a small mouse peeking from behind a crate. For a moment, you consider its usefulness, then shake your head and let it scuttle away, thinking that some ethics must survive, even in times of desperation. Outside, the wind presses against the stone walls, a constant reminder that warmth is fleeting and survival is fragile. You think of the castle's history, of sieges where entire garrisons depended on nothing but broth and ingenuity, and you feel a quiet kinship with the ghosts of those who endured. Mistress Alwyn slides a ladle into the cauldron and pours a small portion into a chipped bowl. She hands it to you with a solemn nod, her eyes glinting with the pride of a teacher witnessing the transformation of meager ingredients into life-sustaining sustenance. You sip again, more fully this time, feeling the heat spread through your chest, a reassurance that even in hunger, life persists. Thomas nudges you, whispering about experimenting with dried herbs for flavor, and you nod, noting how creativity often flourishes under constraint. You recall a quirky tale of a cook in a northern castle who reportedly added roasted acorns to a bone broth to thicken it, a curious culinary choice that may have been necessity or experimentation, and historians still debate which. Here, it doesn't matter. You would have tried the acorns too. The fire pops, sending sparks dancing like tiny stars, and you realize that the cauldron is more than a vessel for broth. It's a symbol of resilience, of transforming scarcity into survival, and of the stubbornness of human ingenuity. Each stir, each scrape, each addition of a root, leaf or marrow fragment is a small victory against the endless winter and the gnawing emptiness. You continue tending the pot, the rhythmic motions soothing, almost meditative. The kitchen is quiet, except for the crackle of the fire and the murmur of distant voices. You imagine future historians peering into records, trying to discern what life was like in these moments, debating the plausibility of bone broth as a sustenance strategy. You know the truth. It is simple, it is real, and it is miraculous. As evening stretches toward night, you ladle a final portion into a bowl, handing it to a shivering comrade. The warmth in their hands, the brief flash of relief on their face, makes the hours of scraping and stirring worthwhile. Outside, the wind moans through the battlements, yet inside, the aroma of broth, herbs, and survival permeates every stone. You take a moment, inhale deeply, and realize that in this simple act, boiling bones, coaxing flavor from marrow, coaxing life from scarcity, you've touched something eternal, the quiet heroism of those who endure. You dip your spoon again, savoring the bland but comforting liquid, and feel a fragile sense of victory settle over the kitchen. Hunger remains, but hope simmers alongside it, thick and sustaining, in the cauldron that has transformed emptiness into nourishment, despair into ritual, and stone into sanctuary. You stand in the pantry, the last shards of salt clinking faintly in a cracked wooden box, and realize that tonight, the difference between flavor and famine rests in these tiny crystalline granules. Mistress Alwyn leans over, peering into the container with worry etched deep into her face. "This isn't enough for the night," she mutters, shaking her head slowly as though scolding the universe itself. Salt has always been a silent king in the kitchen. It preserves, it flavors, it transforms what would otherwise be misery into something tolerable. You remember reading that medieval armies would march hundreds of miles to secure a single shipment of salt, calling it white gold, and you can't help but smile at the historical understatement. Scholars still debate whether that nickname was due to scarcity or symbolic power, but here, amidst empty sacks and frost-bitten vegetables, its value feels painfully real. You tip the last handful into a pot of gruel, the crystals dissolving slowly, adding a shimmer of hope to the thin, murky liquid. Hunger makes you notice everything: the subtle change in color, the faint improvement in aroma, the way the first spoonful now tastes like salvation rather than despair. Thomas hovers nearby, nervously twirling a small leather pouch in his hands. "We could ration it," he suggests, "or risk sprinkling a little extra in each portion to keep morale up." You shake your head, calculating like a general in a battle you never wanted to join. One wrong decision, and someone will go without entirely, perhaps collapsing quietly in a corner while others survive. You recall the story of a castle under siege, where the steward attempted to dilute salt with sand, a practice historians now debate as either fact or legend. Here, though, it feels believable. Desperation can warp ethics just as quickly as it can invent flavor. The fire crackles low in the hearth, casting shadows that seem to stretch toward the small, precious grains, as if coveting their power. You stir the pot gently, mindful that even the smallest clump of salt must be evenly distributed. Every spoonful is precious, every mouthful a negotiation between need and restraint. Outside, frost glazes the battlements, and the wind carries a bitter reminder that winter does not forgive. The castle's defenses are strong, but food is weak, and in your hands the salt becomes a currency of life itself. You remember hearing that some medieval cooks would hide salt in secret pouches, trading it among servants to ensure survival. Scholars debate whether this was widespread practice or isolated cleverness, but you understand why it is instinct, preservation, and small-scale rebellion rolled into one. You sprinkle a final pinch into the broth, inhale the faintly briny aroma, and feel a surge of cautious relief. Even in scarcity, the body recognizes the magic of salt. Hunger lulls just slightly, replaced by awareness, as if the grains themselves whisper, "You can endure another night." Mistress Alwyn surveys the kitchen, her eyes sweeping across the lined faces of servants and apprentices, noting who looks the faintest, who needs encouragement. "Spread it thin," she instructs. "Every grain counts." You nod, understanding that the tiny crystals have become strategy, morale, and survival rolled into a single glinting miracle. A mouse scurries past your foot, barely noticed, and for a moment you feel the absurdity of life's persistence. Even creatures so small, so insignificant, find sustenance while the great lords and knights feast in memory alone. You dip a spoon into the gruel and taste the salt, its power immediate, not just flavor, but energy, a reminder that even the smallest intervention can make a difference. It strikes you that history remembers sieges in terms of battles and plunder. But for those like you, it's measured in the grams of salt each stomach receives. A faint laugh escapes your lips, unbidden, at the thought that survival might hinge on something so ordinary and extraordinary at once. You recall the tale of a servant who allegedly hid salt in her hair braid, sneaking tiny pinches into the nightly meal. Historians still debate whether this actually happened, or if it is myth. But as you sprinkle your final portion, the idea feels right, clever, and entirely human. You set down the spoon, observing the shimmer across the gruel, and feel a sense of achievement, practical, quiet, and entirely personal. The fire sputters, casting dancing shadows across stone walls, and the room seems momentarily illuminated, not by flame, but by hope. Hunger is still present, gnawing at the edges of consciousness, but the salt has shifted the balance, giving each swallow meaning, each meal a small triumph. You glance at Thomas, who grins faintly, and at Mistress Alwyn, whose stern expression softens just enough to hint at pride. For a brief time, the kitchen is less a chamber of scarcity and more a place where ingenuity, discipline, and careful stewardship turn despair into endurance. Outside, the wind continues its relentless assault, frost etching lace patterns on the windows. But inside, the tiny brilliant grains of salt remind you that even in the harshest winters, life persists, resilience is crafted, and survival tastes a little sweeter than it did before. You sip again, letting warmth and briny comfort spread, and for the first time that evening, believe that tomorrow might bring another opportunity to stretch sustenance, preserve dignity, and defy the cruel arithmetic of famine. You stand over a shallow wooden tub, the remnants of barley soaking in tepid water, and for a moment hesitate, wrinkling your nose at the faint mustiness that rises from the grains. Thomas snickers beside you, holding up a clump of moldy barley between his fingers. "They say this'll make weak ale," he whispers, half proud, half disgusted, and you realize that desperation has a flavor all its own. You remember stories of medieval kitchens where servants salvaged every scrap of grain, even when it had begun to sprout or mildew, turning it into weak beer or gruel that, to the untrained palate, tasted like survival itself. Scholars debate how common such practices truly were. Some insist it was a rare measure, others argue it was standard during famine, but here in this frostbitten castle it feels entirely plausible. Mistress Alwen moves with quiet authority, tipping the grains into a large cauldron and pouring over hot water, coaxing them to release whatever goodness remains. The aroma rises, earthy, slightly sour, but oddly comforting. You stir slowly, watching the murky liquid darken, thinking of the countless hours previous generations must have spent perfecting this crude alchemy. Outside, the wind rattles against the battlements, carrying the cries of ravens that feast on the unwanted, mirroring your own efforts to reclaim sustenance from the overlooked. A faint hiss escapes from the cauldron as some of the grains bubble, and you can't help but laugh quietly. Its hiss sounds like applause for your ingenuity. You dip a spoon cautiously, tasting the faintly bitter liquid. It's not pleasant in the way a fresh stew might be, but it warms your chest, a reminder that any nourishment is precious when hunger gnaws at your insides. Someone whispers about adding a pinch of honey, though the supply is negligible. You nod, imagining a sweetness that will never arrive, a small psychological trick to make the bland taste bearable. History records similar experiments, where servants would brew weak ale from partially spoiled barley to provide hydration and nutrition during sieges. Some historians question the efficacy of this practice, debating whether it truly sustained bodies or simply delayed collapse, but the narrative is clear. Survival often demands ingenuity and a willingness to embrace the unpalatable. You remember a quirky account of a monk who allegedly added moss to fermenting barley, claiming it improved digestion. Historians still argue over whether this is fact or folklore. Here it doesn't matter. Creativity is currency, and even the faintest flavor of hope counts. As the ale simmers, the kitchen fills with a warm, heady scent that blurs the line between sustenance and ritual. You glance around at the other servants, noting their expressions, pale faces lit with the dim firelight, eyes alight with a mixture of dread and anticipation. Everyone knows that this is a gamble. Each sip could strengthen or sour, nourish or sicken, and yet the human spirit is nothing if not hopeful. You ladle a small portion into a chipped wooden mug and hand it to Thomas, who curls his fingers around it like a talisman. The first sip makes him wince, then grin sheepishly. "Better than nothing," he mutters, echoing a refrain you've heard all week. You sip yourself, letting the warmth spread slowly through your torso, the faint bitterness counterbalanced by the comforting texture and heat. In that moment, the kitchen feels alive, not with plenty, but with the determination to endure. Outside, the snow continues to drift, frosting the stones and making the castle appear both isolated and protected. The contrast between the harshness of winter and the warmth of your makeshift ale is almost poetic, a reminder that survival is as much about ingenuity and morale as it is about sustenance. Mistress Alwyn moves between the cauldrons, adjusting heat, skimming froth, offering a few words of guidance, her presence a stabilizing force. You reflect on the strange alchemy at work. Moldy barley, hot water, time and patience combining to produce a beverage that, in its own humble way, embodies hope. A small clatter near the larder reminds you that even while you brew, others scavenge and scuttle, retrieving what they can from corners overlooked, a symphony of survival orchestrated by necessity. You stir again, the spoon tracing slow, deliberate circles, and feel a quiet satisfaction, each motion an investment in life, each swirl a statement that hunger can be managed, if not conquered. You sip once more, tasting warmth, resilience, and the faint tang of improvisation. The bittersweet liquid lingers on your tongue, a reminder that even in scarcity, comfort can be found, and that ingenuity, no matter how humble, is a shield against despair. Outside, a raven caws from the battlements, its voice cutting through the night air, a witness to your quiet triumphs. You tilt the mug, finishing the last dregs, and realize that while tomorrow will bring more cold, more hunger, and more challenges, tonight you have brewed not just ale, but hope itself, one murky bitter sip at a time. You sit on the cold stone floor of the kitchen, the shadows from the flickering fire dancing across the walls, and for a moment consider the absurdity of your situation. Hunger has turned the mundane into delicacies and the impossible into potential meals. Before you lies a small collection of unconventional ingredients, remnants that in any other season would be considered waste, the faintly sweet tallow of half-burned candles, a scrap of leather from an old boot softened by rain, and a handful of dried herbs pilfered from the Lord's private storeroom. Mistress Alwen watches with that same mixture of authority and indulgence that you've come to rely on, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully as she assesses what might be edible and what is merely symbolic. At least wax melts into something palatable, she mutters, glancing at the cauldron where thin gruel simmers weakly. You pick up a sliver of candle, noting its faintly sweet smell, almost like a distant memory of honeyed tarts from feasts long past, and hold it to your lips. The texture is unfamiliar, slightly waxy, but when chewed carefully, it softens, releasing a hint of sweetness that your starving palate greedily accepts. You remember hearing that in certain besieged castles, servants were known to mix small amounts of tallow or even hardened fat into their gruel, both to increase caloric intake and to make the thin meal feel more substantial. Scholars still debate how widespread these practices were and whether the consumption of candle wax was literal or a metaphorical exaggeration, but as you chew, the taste of survival feels undeniably real. Next, you turn your attention to the piece of leather, worn and softened by rain and labor. It's a fragment of a boot, and instinctively you wrinkle your nose, but desperation is persuasive. Thomas nudges you and whispers, "Once soaked in broth. It's almost like chewy bread." You pause, skeptical, but you remember past experiments. Roots, leaves, and even bones had been transformed into sustenance, so why not leather? You submerge the scrap into the simmering broth, watching it absorb heat and liquid, softening gradually. After several minutes, you fish it out with tongs and bite cautiously, surprised at how palatable it has become. There is no flavor per se, only texture and the faint taste of the broth that has slowly seeped into its fibers, but it is enough to trick your mind into satisfaction. Hunger is a creative force, and you marvel at how it bends logic, taste, and even morality, compelling you to explore boundaries you would never imagine in ordinary circumstances. Nearby, a small bowl of dried herbs adds a fragrant lift to the improvised meal, their aroma filling the kitchen and masking some of the more dubious components. You sprinkle a pinch onto your plate, inhaling the scent and allowing your senses to indulge in a momentary feast, even as reality reminds you that this is survival, not pleasure. The fire sputters, casting long shadows across the walls, and you notice a mouse scuttling near the pantry. Its presence is oddly comforting. If the creatures outside survive, perhaps there is a pattern to life even in this harsh stone environment. Hunger sharpens your attention, and you realize that every movement, every sound, and every odor has significance. The wax, the leather, the herbs, they are not merely food but symbols of resourcefulness, of humanity's ability to persevere in dire circumstances. Outside, the wind presses against the castle walls, rattling shutters and sending shivers down your spine. You think about historical accounts of sieges, where servants, pressed to the limits of endurance, would eat almost anything: leather, tallow, even paper soaked in milk. Scholars debate the literal truth of these accounts, some suggesting exaggeration, others noting archaeological evidence supporting extreme dietary improvisation. Here, as you chew carefully on softened leather, it feels entirely plausible, even ordinary in its necessity. You pause to sip a small portion of gruel, now enriched with a touch of candle wax for fat, and the warmth spreads slowly through your chest. The combination is strange, almost bitter, yet nourishing. You glance at Thomas, who is carefully testing a small scrap of a tattered glove soaked in broth, and exchange a wry smile. Shared hardship breeds peculiar camaraderie. The kitchen is quiet, except for the occasional pop from the fire, and the low murmurs of other servants tending to their own portions. Every bite, every sip, is a negotiation between survival and revulsion, a delicate balance that requires focus and resolve. You reflect on the ingenuity required, turning what would otherwise be refuse into sustenance, making do with limited tools, and finding nourishment where none should exist. This is practical alchemy, a transformation as magical as any spell, and it is grounded in necessity rather than fantasy. You add a pinch of crushed herbs to your portion, inhaling the aroma and letting it lift the spirit slightly, providing a psychological as well as physical boost. Hunger is relentless, but the small pleasures, however unconventional, create a framework of endurance. The candle wax softens in your mouth, the leather provides substance, and the gruel carries warmth and flavor. You chew thoughtfully, contemplating the strange beauty of survival, that it can make the unpalatable necessary, and the necessary sometimes oddly satisfying. A mouse pauses nearby, twitching its nose, and for a moment you feel a kinship, acknowledging that all creatures, great and small, find ways to sustain themselves. You stir the cauldron again, noting that the mixture has thickened slightly, a minor victory, proof that persistence and attention yield results. Mistress Alwen moves among the servants, distributing small portions and offering guidance, her presence a reminder that leadership and skill are as crucial to survival as the ingredients themselves. Outside, the night deepens, snow piling against the walls, yet the firelight and the strange improvised meal inside provide warmth and a sense of security. Each bite is an affirmation, life persists, ingenuity triumphs, and even candle wax and leather can become symbols of hope. You chew slowly, savoring warmth, texture, and the knowledge that while unconventional, every morsel is a small rebellion against hunger. Hunger remains, persistent and gnawing, but the combination of heat, nourishment, and resourcefulness sustains you. You glance around the kitchen, noting the resilience etched into every face, every movement, each portion consumed. Each unconventional bite strengthens not only the body, but morale, fostering a sense of community and shared endurance. You sip a final bit of broth, letting the mixture of wax, herbs, and softened leather fill your mouth, and for a fleeting moment, the kitchen feels abundant, a sanctuary of survival amid stone and frost. You rise carefully, carrying your bowl to the sink area for cleaning, reflecting that tonight, even in the strangest of circumstances, you have eaten, endured, and preserved hope. The wind howls outside, but inside, warmth, ingenuity, and determination hold the night at bay. And as the shadows flicker and the fire sputters, you realize that survival often tastes strange, improbable, and utterly human, a reminder that even in scarcity, life finds a way, and even the most unusual edibles can become a testament to resilience, creativity, and the enduring will to live. You step into the great hall, the long wooden tables gleaming faintly under flickering torchlight, and for a moment, the illusion of abundance fools even your weary eyes. Platters of food stretch along the boards, roast birds, golden bread, bowls of stew, but as you glance closer, you realize the deception. The poultry are empty shells stuffed with straw. Bread is painted to look fresh, and the stew bubbles weakly, more water than substance. You suppress a chuckle, thinking that the nobles upstairs would never suspect how thin the reality is. It is a theater of survival, a pageant where appearances must triumph over necessity. Mistress Alwen glides past, adjusting platters with delicate hands, ensuring the illusion holds even as servants scurry in the shadows to guard the secret truth. The real sustenance is hidden behind walls, beneath floorboards, and in pockets of ingenuity that the Lord will never see. You remember reading accounts from the 14th century describing similar feasts, where scarcity forced kitchens to stage banquets for visiting dignitaries, while the household scraped by on rations far below their guests' expectations. Scholars debate how often such deceptions occurred versus the fanciful exaggerations of chroniclers, but here and now, it feels entirely authentic. The smell of roasted herbs mingles with the faint waft of wax and smoke from the hearth, creating an aroma that teases your hunger while offering nothing substantial. You take a careful step closer to a platter, noting how the bird's wings droop unnaturally, and the bread's crust is far too uniform to be real. The deception is artful, and you can't help but admire the cunning involved, even as your stomach growls in protest. Somewhere above, the Lord moves through the hall, oblivious to the realities of hunger. His footsteps echo across stone floors as he surveys the scene, smiling at the apparent abundance. You think about the strange duality of life in the castle. The nobles maintain power through appearances, while the servants endure the truth of scarcity, hidden just out of sight. You remember a peculiar anecdote about a steward who allegedly used painted clay to simulate loaves of bread during a prolonged siege. Some historians question the literal truth, arguing it may have been a symbolic tale of clever deception, yet the concept resonates entirely with the practices you witness now. You glance at the servants nearby, some scowling at the empty splendor, others suppressing smirks, and realize that this shared secret binds you in ways nothing else could. Hunger is still present, gnawing and persistent, but the collective act of maintaining the illusion creates a strange camaraderie. You move to adjust a bowl of stew, adding a thin layer of water to make it appear more substantial, and watch as the light catches on the surface, reflecting the fire in shimmering waves. The illusion is effective. Anyone not paying close attention would believe in a feast. A stray mouse darts across the floor, unnoticed amid the grand display, a small reminder that life persists in corners that go unseen. You bend to chase it away, thinking wryly that the rodent is the only one here truly benefiting from the masquerade. The feast continues, silent but tense. Every movement matters. A misaligned platter could reveal the truth. A dropped spoon could betray the ruse. You remember stories of medieval lords punishing servants for failing to maintain appearances during inspection, though whether this was widespread or a singular case remains debated among historians. Here, you understand the logic perfectly. Perception is survival. You pass a platter, tilting it carefully so the painted bread remains upright, the roast bird's wings angled just so. Small details matter immensely in the delicate balance of deception. Outside, snow drifts lazily against the windows, muffling the sounds of the castle and providing a quiet cocoon for your clandestine work. Hunger presses at your consciousness, but the satisfaction of crafting the illusion offers a different sort of nourishment: pride, ingenuity, and the fleeting comfort of control. You glance at Thomas, who balances a small carved loaf in his hands, adjusting it for symmetry. You exchange a look, communicating silently the absurdity of your task: to feed the eyes rather than the stomach. A whisper passes among the servants, joking about noble diet, consisting of air, shadow, and painted bread. Laughter is quiet, restrained, because the line between humor and insolence is perilously thin. You taste the air, heavy with smoke, wax, and faint herbs, and imagine the flavors that are not present: rich mutton, spiced wine, roasted root vegetables. Your mind conjures the warmth, the texture, the smell, as a temporary balm for your gnawing hunger. Mistress Alwyn glances toward you, her eyes sharp yet approving. Recognizing your care in maintaining the illusion, you feel a surge of quiet pride. The success of the feast lies not in the Lord's satisfaction, but in the knowledge that you have preserved dignity, morale, and the delicate balance of survival. A crow caws outside, a stark reminder that the world beyond the walls does not share in this delicate artifice. Hunger, cold and danger persist, but within the hall, the stage is yours to maintain. You adjust another platter, ensuring the bread appears golden, the roasted birds plump, the stew bubbling convincingly, and in the rhythm of this meticulous labor, the kitchen becomes a sanctuary, a theater where scarcity is disguised as plenty. You pause for a moment, listening to the echo of footsteps above and the soft scrape of spoons on plates, appreciating the tension and skill involved in sustaining the ruse. The night deepens, torches flicker, and shadows stretch across the walls like living spectators. You think about the paradox. The grand display is nothing more than illusion, yet its existence provides sustenance of a different kind: hope, morale, and a sense of agency in a world dominated by hunger. You take a breath, inhaling the faintly roasted aroma that dances with the smoke and tallow, and realize that the siege banquet is more than performance, it is survival. Hunger gnaws. Yes, but the satisfaction of knowing you can maintain the illusion, protect the vulnerable, and preserve the dignity of those around you is a rare kind of nourishment. You sip a small portion of broth, lean back, and watch the hall, noting the subtle movements, the flickers of torchlight, the careful positioning of plates. Every detail matters. And in that meticulous attention, in the quiet artistry of survival through illusion, you find a fragile triumph, that even when tables are empty in reality, the human spirit can craft abundance out of scarcity and resilience out of necessity. The night stretches onward, shadows deepening, but within the hall, the siege banquet continues, a dance of perception, endurance, and ingenuity, proving that sometimes the most important feasts are those made for the eyes, for morale, and for the shared secret smiles of those who endure together. You descend the narrow stone steps into the castle's cellar, each footfall echoing softly against the cold, damp walls, and the air grows heavier with the scent of earth, mold, and something faintly sweet that hints at forgotten barrels of wine. The darkness wraps around you like a cloak, and for a moment you feel the thrill of secrecy, the kind that only hunger and necessity can create. Here, in the subterranean depths, the rules of the upper halls seem suspended. Whispers carry further, shadows hide more, and small victories take on a grand significance. You see Thomas already crouched near a stack of dusty barrels, examining the labels with careful fingers. "Some of these might still have good barley," he murmurs, the excitement in his voice tempered by caution. You nod, understanding the delicate balance. Take too much, and the steward will notice. Take too little, and hunger gnaws at your insides with relentless insistence. In this hidden world beneath the castle, survival depends not only on ingenuity, but also on discretion, and every decision feels monumental. You start with a barrel labeled faintly oats, prying open the wooden lid to inspect its contents. Some grains are spoiled, shriveled, or moldy, but a careful hand can sort the usable from the useless, creating a small trove of sustenance. Mistress Alwyn's instructions echo in your mind. Every scrap counts. Even the tiniest kernel can be the difference between endurance and collapse. You remember reading about medieval sieges where hidden cellars provided the margin between life and death, and how servants developed intricate systems to conceal food from both lords and marauding soldiers. Scholars debate the scale and sophistication of such networks, but as you lift handfuls of oats, inspecting each kernel for freshness, the practicality of these methods feels clear. A faint scuffling sound alerts you to movement at the far end of the cellar, and you freeze, breath held. A mouse emerges, nibbling at a spilled grain, unbothered by your presence. You grin faintly, thinking that if any creature deserves a prize for persistence, it is the little scavenger that survives alongside you. You carefully scoop the usable oats into a cloth sack, mindful not to spill, and glance toward a half-filled wine cask. Its cork is loose, and the faint aroma of fermented grapes wafts upward. You hesitate. Alcohol might not nourish, but in small amounts it can lift spirits and warm the body, a psychological comfort almost as vital as the food itself. A quirk from history crosses your mind. Servants in some medieval households reportedly consumed weak beer or watered-down wine, not only for hydration but to stave off despair during famine. Some historians argue this was common practice, others suggest it was the exception rather than the rule. Here, though, it seems a practical necessity, and you decide to pour a small sip into a tin cup, tasting the faint tang of fermented grapes. The warmth spreads through your chest, a subtle morale boost, and you smile, realizing that survival is not merely about calories, but also about sustaining hope and spirit. Thomas nudges a small barrel toward you, whispering, "This one might have salted fish. Worth checking." You nod, carefully prying open the lid. The scent hits immediately. Sharp, briny, almost overpowering, but undeniably nourishing. You scoop out a small piece, knowing that this tiny portion, shared among several hands, could extend lives for a day or two. In the shadows of the cellar, the act of sharing takes on a sacred quality. Each decision to take, to give, to withhold, is a negotiation of trust, resourcefulness, and empathy. You watch as a fellow servant kneels beside a cracked barrel, revealing a handful of dried roots, small but surprisingly nutritious when boiled. Together, you divide the bounty, careful to ration for maximum effect. Hunger sharpens both your senses and your sense of ethics. You remember a story chronicled from a northern castle where a hidden cellar contained secret caches of grain, carefully tracked with chalk marks and whispered codes. Scholars still debate whether these methods were elaborate or anecdotal, but the principle resonates perfectly in the cool, shadowed air of your own cellar. Discretion is survival, and knowledge of secret resources is power. You pause to sip more of the weak wine, letting its warmth combine with the earthy scent of roots and grains, and realize that the cellar functions as both pantry and sanctuary. The isolation from the upper halls, the muffled sounds of footsteps above, and the dim light create a cocoon, where planning, sharing, and innovation can flourish without interference. You take a deep breath, inhaling the layered aromas of oats, salted fish, wine, and mossy stone, and feel a sense of accomplishment. Each careful scoop, each rationed bite, each small act of prudence is a quiet triumph over scarcity. The firelight from above barely reaches here, yet the warmth of camaraderie and ingenuity fills the space. You tuck a small portion of oats and roots into your sack, noting the significance of each kernel, each fragment of nutrition. A mouse scuttles again, and you imagine it as a fellow conspirator in the art of survival. The cellar is alive with subtle movement, whispers, and small triumphs. Each breath carries hope alongside hunger. You glance at Thomas, who smiles faintly, understanding without words the delicate balance maintained here, a blend of prudence, courage, and silent rebellion against the relentless winter outside. Together, you organize what has been found, dividing portions for the infirmary, the kitchen staff, and yourselves. Even in scarcity, the act of sharing sustains morale, reminding you that survival is not solely individual but communal. Outside, the wind presses against the castle walls, howling through the battlements, yet the cellar remains a sanctuary of calculated sustenance. You take a final scoop of salted fish, feeling the brine sting slightly, and pair it with a small portion of soaked oats. The taste is strange, a mix of earthiness, brine, and warmth, but it fills the stomach, and more importantly, reassures the mind. In these hidden depths, you understand that endurance is crafted not only through ingestion, but through knowledge, discretion, and cooperation. The act of sharing, the subtle concealment of resources, and the careful rationing of what remains, transform the cellar into a crucible of survival. You sit for a moment, listening to the muffled echo of the upper halls, inhaling the scent of earth, roots, and the faint wine, and feel a fragile triumph settle over you, that even in famine, ingenuity, trust, and meticulous care can create abundance from scarcity. Each kernel, each sip, each shared morsel is a testament to human resourcefulness, a quiet victory over the relentless pressures of winter, hunger, and isolation. You stand, securing the gathered supplies, and realize that the secrets held in these stone walls, in whispered instructions and careful distribution, will carry you, Thomas, and the other servants through another day. Hunger remains, ever present, yet tempered by foresight, cooperation, and the unspoken joy of shared survival. You rise, feeling both the weight of responsibility and the satisfaction of minor triumphs, and step back toward the stairway, carrying knowledge, sustenance, and the quiet reassurance that even in the coldest, darkest winters, life endures, ingenuity flourishes, and hope simmers steadily, ready to sustain the body and spirit alike. You carry a small tray through the shadowed corridors, the weight of it deceptively light, but every scrap upon it feels monumental. The Lord's table has been cleared, the nobles sated, or at least convinced themselves that they are, and now the aftermath is yours to harvest. A half-eaten roll, a sliver of roast meat scraped from the bone, a spoonful of gravy thick with fat. These remnants, insignificant to the privileged, are sustenance gold in the hands of those who toil unseen. You remember stories chronicled from castles during sieges, where servants survived on precisely these scraps, supplementing meager rations with what the upper tables discarded. Historians debate whether such scavenging was routine or desperate improvisation, but here it is practice, reality, and ingenuity all at once. You step carefully, mindful of the echoes in the stone corridors, knowing that the steward's sharp eye or a passing guard could transform a simple collection of leftovers into trouble. Every movement is deliberate, every scrap carefully evaluated. You peer at a piece of bread, crusted with crumbs and smeared with what might have been butter, now hardened. Even this morsel is precious. You tuck it onto your tray with care, balancing it alongside a small hunk of meat, whose smell tells you it will sustain for hours, perhaps a day. Hunger sharpens your senses, and you can detect subtle differences in smell and texture that would otherwise go unnoticed. You hear a faint shuffle behind you. Thomas has taken up a similar task, whispering with quiet excitement as he inspects each plate for overlooked treasures. Together you navigate the corridors like ghosts, invisible and purposeful. The act of collecting the Lord's leftovers is ritualized, almost ceremonial, as though the plates themselves contain the distilled essence of survival. You place a sliver of roasted root vegetable beside a bit of stale bread, imagining how it will later be transformed into a small but nourishing meal. The kitchen looms ahead, lit by the last embers of the evening fire, and you feel the thrill of anticipation. Each scrap, once brought here, will be handled with care, cooked or softened, and divided to stretch further than its size suggests. You recall a curious anecdote about a manor in northern France, where servants were said to recycle noble leftovers so meticulously that a single chicken could feed dozens over a week, turning minimal resources into maximum sustenance. Some scholars argue this is exaggeration, others cite household accounts and inventories that confirm extraordinary ingenuity. You take a careful step, noticing the faint smear of gravy along the table's edge. You dip a fingertip, testing its richness. Then smile. This simple gesture embodies the delicate alchemy of survival, transforming scraps into life. A mouse scuttles near your feet, drawn perhaps by the scent or perhaps by instinct. And for a moment you imagine the tiny creature as a fellow connoisseur of frugality. You shake your head and return to your careful collection. As you near the kitchen, the smell of simmering broth greets you, mingling with the earthy tang of root vegetables and the faint metallic hint of old iron pots. Your heart lifts. Soon these scraps will be converted, stretched, and combined with other hidden reserves to produce meals that are more than sustenance. They are a testament to perseverance. You lay the tray on a work table, and Mistress Alwyn approaches, inspecting each item. Divide it carefully, she instructs, her voice low but firm. Some for the infirmary, some for the kitchen staff, and a bit for those in the guardhouse. Nothing wasted. You nod, understanding that distribution is a delicate science. A misplaced morsel could spark resentment, and every hand deserves consideration. You begin separating the scraps, breaking them down into portions small enough to serve multiple people, yet sufficient to satisfy basic hunger. Each division requires judgment. The size, composition, and texture of each piece matter. A crusty corner of bread can be soaked in broth to create a nourishing mush. A sliver of meat can be sliced thinly, combined with root vegetables and turned into a small stew. The process is laborious but meditative, a way of asserting control over scarcity. You remember reading that in some medieval households, servants maintained secret codes for distributing leftovers, ensuring fairness and preserving order even amid famine. Historians debate the prevalence of such systems, but the principle resonates here. Survival depends not just on gathering sustenance, but on managing it wisely. You pause to taste a small piece of bread softened in broth. The texture is coarse, the flavor muted, but it fills a hollow in your chest, offering a quiet satisfaction. Around you, the kitchen hums with low conversation. Discussions of what can be stretched, how long portions might last, and who has particular needs tonight. The air is rich with the mingling smells of simmering gruel, roasted roots, and the faint tang of tallow, creating an olfactory tapestry that is both comforting and invigorating. You consider the social hierarchy embedded in these scraps. The lord may dine on roasted meats and fine bread, yet the survival of the castle depends on the careful management of what remains. You recognize that in these simple actions, dividing, softening, and preparing leftovers, you participate in a hidden ecosystem that sustains the entire household. Thomas whispers a suggestion about soaking some hardened bread in weak wine to improve flavor, and you nod. The idea is unconventional but ingenious. Alcohol can soften texture and add warmth, transforming a meager bite into something more palatable. History provides precedents. Chroniclers have noted that during prolonged sieges, medieval cooks would employ similar methods, blending ingenuity with necessity. You continue, slicing, soaking, and distributing, mindful of maintaining both efficiency and fairness. Every action feels weighty. The difference between a satisfied stomach and a night of gnawing emptiness hinges on these small decisions. Outside, the wind presses against the castle walls, but within the kitchen, the warmth of the hearth and the rhythmic labor of preparation create a sanctuary of relative comfort. You take a moment to sip a small portion of broth, letting the heat and faint flavors spread through your chest, and feel a subtle sense of triumph. Survival, you realize, is often a quiet affair, composed of small victories rather than grand triumphs. The process continues. Scraps combined, portions divided, and meals prepared for distribution across the castle. Even in scarcity, the act of transforming leftovers into sustenance provides nourishment not only for the body but for morale. You glance at Mistress Alwyn, who nods approvingly, acknowledging the skill, patience, and care involved. Each bite, each morsel, each carefully prepared dish represents resourcefulness and resilience. Hunger remains, persistent and insistent, yet tempered by the knowledge that through diligence, cooperation, and creativity, survival is possible. You lift a spoonful of the improvised stew, taste the complex, earthy mixture, and feel a quiet gratitude for the scraps, for the kitchen, and for the shared effort that turns absence into sustenance. Outside, the castle walls shiver under the wind, but inside, the warmth, ingenuity, and careful management of the lord's leftovers sustain both body and spirit. You finish the final portion, setting the tray aside, and realize that tonight, as every night in recent memory, endurance is crafted not from abundance, but from precision, creativity, and the willingness to transform what remains into something that can nourish. And in that realization, you feel a subtle, hard-earned satisfaction that even when the tables above offer little, the hands below can create sustenance, preserve dignity, and sustain life. You stumble upon it entirely by accident, wedged behind a stack of empty wine casks in the farthest corner of the cellar, where shadows cluster thickest. A barrel, dusty and weathered, its wood darkened with age, almost indistinguishable from the rest, beckons with a promise that feels miraculous in its timing. You press your hands against it, testing its weight, and a thrill passes through you. It could be empty, it could be spoiled, it could be nothing at all, but the possibility, however faint, ignites a hope that has been dim for weeks. Mistress Alwyn hovers beside you, eyes wide beneath the flickering torchlight. "Where did that come from?" she whispers, her voice trembling with a mix of incredulity and relief. You both know that finding hidden supplies in a castle under siege is akin to discovering treasure in a labyrinth, except this treasure sustains life rather than fuels vanity. Carefully, you pry the lid open, and the scent of salt, smoke, and preservation rises immediately. Inside lies a cache of salted fish, packed tightly in brine, their skin glistening faintly even beneath the layers of age. The aroma is sharp, briny, and overpowering, yet it is a perfume of survival. For a moment you simply inhale, feeling the weight of weeks of hunger lift slightly with each breath. You remember historical accounts from Northern Europe during famine winters, where servants and kitchen staff stumbled upon forgotten barrels of salted fish, barley, or preserved meat, extending life and morale for days. Some historians debate how common these discoveries were, suggesting they were either miraculous luck or carefully concealed foresight. Others argue that they were deliberate caches maintained by resourceful stewards. Here the debate is irrelevant. You have found sustenance, tangible and real. You pull out one fish, examining its leathery texture and salt-crusted surface. With careful hands, you rinse it in a small basin of water, removing excess brine, then consider how to cook it. The kitchen is modest, the fire low, yet even a single spark can transform these preserved morsels into nourishment. You place the fish near the embers, letting the heat coax flavor and warmth into the flesh, and notice a faint sizzle as it begins to release oils. Thomas peeks over your shoulder, eyes wide. "I thought those barrels were empty," he says, disbelief tinging his voice. You grin, shaking your head. "Apparently, miracles happen in the coldest, darkest corners," you reply, feeling a surge of cautious excitement. Hunger has sharpened your senses. Every smell, every sound, every flicker of light becomes a marker of potential survival or loss. The barrel itself feels almost holy, a vessel of providence amid scarcity. You remember the tale of a medieval kitchen where a servant allegedly discovered a forgotten store of salted herring beneath a pile of discarded barrels, enough to sustain the household for a week. Some scholars debate the literal truth of this story, but as you lift the fish from its brine, it feels entirely plausible, even ordinary in its context. You set several fish aside to prepare later, envisioning how they can be boiled into a hearty stew with roots and herbs, each portion carefully rationed. The act of salvaging and preparing these forgotten supplies is precise, deliberate. One misstep could ruin days of careful conservation. As you work, the smell of brine mingles with smoke from the hearth and the earthy scent of the cellar, creating an aroma that is both sharp and comforting. You slice a small piece of fish, tasting it raw, salty, firm, almost metallic, and feel a small thrill as your stomach recognizes nourishment where it had previously only imagined it. The act of discovery transforms the atmosphere. The cellar, once a place of mere storage and shadows, becomes a stage for ingenuity, celebration, and survival. You consider the ethics of this find. Should it be shared immediately, rationed carefully, or perhaps reserved for those most in need? Hunger complicates morality, bending it toward pragmatism. Every decision carries weight. Mistress Alwyn advises caution. "We distribute evenly," she says. "No one should know the full extent, or it will attract attention from the Lord's steward or others who may be less forgiving." You nod, appreciating that survival requires both discretion and foresight. You begin carefully dividing the fish into manageable portions, pairing them with root vegetables salvaged from the secret garden beneath the walls, and a touch of broth. Each bundle is a combination of taste, nutrition, and psychological comfort, a small triumph over the oppressive winter and relentless hunger. The process is meticulous. Slicing, boiling, and rationing. Each action reminds you that even miracles require work to be realized. Outside, the wind rattles the battlements, snow pressing against the stone with relentless persistence. Within, the warmth of the hearth and the knowledge of your discovery provide a cocoon, a fragile sanctuary against the cold and scarcity. You set aside one small portion for Thomas, noting how the act of sharing creates bonds, morale, and trust, a currency as important as the food itself. Historical records note that in some sieges, secret caches of food were intentionally shared among kitchen staff in measured portions to maintain labor efficiency and morale. Some debates question whether these distributions were equitable or skewed toward favored servants, but you feel the logic now. Fairness preserves function, and function preserves life. You take a small piece of fish and taste it once more, feeling the salt, the oil, and the subtle texture of preserved sustenance fill your mouth and your stomach. Relief courses through your body. For a few moments, the gnawing emptiness abates, replaced by warmth and a rare sense of abundance. You glance at the barrel again, realizing that while the cache will not last indefinitely, its discovery has shifted the immediate future from despair to cautious optimism. You and Thomas sit for a brief moment, savoring small bites, exchanging quiet smiles that carry more meaning than words. Hunger still whispers, but it has been softened by ingenuity, luck, and careful management. You reflect on the strange paradox of survival. In scarcity, every detail matters, every morsel is precious, and even something forgotten and hidden for months can alter the course of endurance. The cellar hums with quiet activity. Other servants move in the shadows, preparing portions, maintaining the fire, and ensuring that each resource is optimized for sustenance. You feel the weight of responsibility settle lightly on your shoulders here. The fate of several bellies rests in your hands, but with care and precision, you can preserve life, morale, and dignity. The night stretches onward, shadows deepening and the temperature dropping. Yet the warmth of your discovery sustains more than bodies. It nurtures spirit. Each slice of fish, each carefully prepared portion is a testament to human ingenuity, the persistence of hope, and the remarkable ability to transform scarcity into survival. You sip a small measure of weak broth alongside a bite of fish, closing your eyes briefly, letting the flavors and warmth anchor you. Outside, snow continues to drift, relentless and indifferent, yet inside, a fragile sense of triumph endures. You think about how future chroniclers might write of castles, sieges, and famine, debating the veracity of tales of forgotten caches and miraculous finds. Here, you know the truth. Survival is as much about perception, planning, and careful management as it is about raw sustenance. The barrel, the fish, and the humble portions you prepare from them embody resilience. Hunger remains, but the gnawing pressure is tempered by satisfaction, ingenuity, and cautious hope. You rise, lifting the barrel slightly to inspect for any overlooked morsels, marveling at how something long forgotten can become a fulcrum of survival. The night deepens further, yet your spirit, nourished by the combination of discovery, preparation, and shared labor, feels steadier, ready to face the next challenge that winter, hunger, and scarcity will present. Each bite consumed, each portion distributed, transforms the cellar into a sanctuary of resourcefulness, proving that even in the harshest conditions, ingenuity, patience, and the occasional miracle can sustain life, preserve dignity, and provide both physical and emotional nourishment when it is needed most. You emerge from the warmth of the cellar into the castle's upper corridors, where frost has claimed every stone ledge and icy gusts slip through cracks in the ancient walls. The wind whistles like a choir of ghosts, and your breath forms clouds that dissolve immediately into the cold air. Tonight, survival is not merely about filling empty stomachs, but also about mastering the cold, the ice, and the brittle boundaries that separate life from suffering. You make your way to the outer storage rooms, where perishable goods, root vegetables, salted meats, and barrels of wine are kept in frigid conditions. The ice crusts over everything, turning the humble storeroom into a natural refrigerator. You lift a cask of cabbage, the surface slick with frost, and tap it gently. Inside, the preserved heads sit tight, the leaves frozen but intact, their sharp earthy smell promising nourishment when cooked or boiled. You remember reading that medieval castles often relied on such ice cellars to extend the life of perishables during the harshest months. Without them, a siege could mean certain starvation even with stored grain. Scholars debate how effective these cellars truly were, whether the frozen produce retained flavor and nutrition or merely delayed decay, but the evidence of their strategic importance is clear. You move carefully, mindful that one slip could send a barrel crashing to the stone floor, spoiling its precious contents and perhaps inviting censure. The snow outside presses relentlessly against the walls, and small drifts accumulate near the cellar doors, reminding you of the world's indifference to the plight of the hungry. You open another barrel, this one containing salted fish from last week's discovery. The icy coating preserves the flesh, stiff and firm, a testament to both the harsh winter and human ingenuity. You pause, inhaling the briny scent, savoring the knowledge that tonight some will eat beyond mere gruel, and the cold has paradoxically become your ally. Thomas joins you, carrying a basket of frost-covered root vegetables he had collected earlier. He brushes off excess snow and holds the basket out to you. "Some for the fire pot," he whispers, his teeth chattering slightly despite the layers of wool and fur. You nod, recognizing that teamwork, improvisation, and shared risk are as crucial here as any caloric content. Together, you begin the delicate process of preparing what will become tonight's meal, combining frost-hardened vegetables with salted fish and a splash of gruel broth. The fire crackles feebly in the hearth, providing both heat and a sense of security, and you carefully chip away at the ice coating each root, a meticulous labor that transforms frozen hardness into edible substance. You remember a peculiar account from a castle in Scandinavia, where servants reportedly used snow to cool wine while simultaneously preserving winter vegetables. Scholars argue whether such practices were widespread or isolated incidents, but the principle of dual-purpose management resonates deeply with you. You slice a parsnip, its interior crisp and sweet despite the frost, and toss it into the simmering cauldron, listening to the faint hiss as it meets the heated liquid. The sound is oddly comforting, a reminder that life persists even when the world seems frozen and indifferent. A stray mouse scuttles along the stone floor, slipping under a crate, and you watch with bemusement. Even the smallest creatures are adept at finding sustenance in icy conditions. Hunger gnaws at your awareness, but the warmth from the fire, combined with the anticipation of a meal, offers a fragile buffer against despair. You begin to add salted fish, cutting it into small pieces, each slice releasing a pungent, briny aroma that mingles with the earthy scent of thawing vegetables. The combination is strange, but undeniably nourishing, and you feel a measure of pride in your improvisation. The kitchen staff moves with quiet urgency, aware that any delay could mean the difference between a warm meal and continued suffering. You recall historical accounts describing snow suppers in northern European castles, where vegetables and salted meats were stored on ice and served directly from frost-laden cellars. Debates among historians question whether the practice preserved flavor or merely sustenance, yet the strategy clearly reflects adaptability in the face of winter scarcity. You stir the pot slowly, mindful of consistency and balance. Each movement, each careful addition, is both culinary and strategic, a way of ensuring that what little you have stretches as far as possible without compromising nourishment. The hiss of heated liquid and the faint pop of ice breaking into the cauldron provide a soundtrack to your labors, echoing softly against the stone walls. Outside, the snow thickens, pressing against shuttered windows and muffling distant footsteps. The cold is relentless, but inside, the combination of fire, ingenuity, and collected resources creates a fragile sanctuary. You taste a spoonful of the simmering mixture, the earthy sweetness of parsnips and the briny tang of fish blending to create a warmth that spreads through your chest. Hunger eases slightly, replaced by the satisfaction of problem-solving and resource management. Mistress Alwyn oversees the preparations, moving among the staff with practiced efficiency, adjusting portions, checking seasoning, and offering guidance on rationing. Her presence steadies you. The knowledge and experience she brings transform scarcity into strategy. You divide the stew into portions, calculating carefully to ensure fairness and maximize nourishment. The act of rationing becomes ritualistic, a meditation on survival, a measure of how human ingenuity and cooperation can turn limited resources into sustenance for many. You pause to sip a small portion, savoring the combination of warmth, flavor, and accomplishment, and feel a momentary reprieve from the gnawing emptiness. Outside, the wind continues its relentless assault, yet inside, the cellar, the fire, and your careful management of frozen provisions create a buffer, a fragile ecosystem of survival. You glance at Thomas, who grins faintly despite chattering teeth, and exchange a look that conveys shared relief and pride. You recall a quirky story about a servant who purportedly used layers of snow and ice to preserve vegetables during prolonged frost, claiming it improved flavor over time. Scholars still debate the veracity of this tale, but here it feels credible, practical, and entirely necessary. The night deepens, shadows lengthen, and the flickering firelight casts the cellar and kitchen in an amber glow, warming both body and spirit. Each spoonful of stew, each careful ration, each thawed vegetable represents resourcefulness, endurance, and the quiet triumph of human creativity over scarcity. Hunger persists, relentless, yet tempered by warmth, ingenuity, and the knowledge that even in the coldest winters, ice and snow can be allies rather than adversaries. You finish distributing portions, ensuring that each hand receives a fair share, and take a final sip of your own meal. The flavors are modest but sustaining. The warmth spreads through your chest and fingers, a balm against the frigid stone surrounding you. In this moment, you realize that survival in the ice cellars is about more than calories. It is about morale, foresight, and the ability to transform adversity into sustenance. The snow outside continues to drift, indifferent and unyielding, yet within, your careful labor has created warmth, nourishment, and a fragile sense of abundance. You clean your tools, set the last portion aside for the infirmary, and breathe deeply, inhaling the scent of thawing vegetables, briny fish, and lingering smoke. Tonight, the ice cellars have yielded sustenance, hope, and a quiet triumph over hunger and winter alike. You step back, feeling both exhaustion and satisfaction, knowing that the strategies, care, and resourcefulness of this night will carry you through until the next meal, the next challenge, and the next opportunity to survive in this cold, relentless world. You emerge from the warmth of the cellar into the castle's upper corridors, where frost has claimed every stone ledge, and icy gusts slip through cracks in the ancient walls. The wind whistles like a choir of ghosts, and your breath forms clouds that dissolve immediately into the cold air. Tonight, survival is not merely about filling empty stomachs, but also about mastering the cold, the ice, and the brittle boundaries that separate life from suffering. You make your way to the outer storage rooms, where perishable goods, root vegetables, salted meats, and barrels of wine are kept in frigid conditions. The ice crusts over everything, turning the humble storeroom into a natural refrigerator. You lift a cask of cabbage, the surface slick with frost, and tap it gently. Inside, the preserved heads sit tight, the leaves frozen but intact, their sharp, earthy smell promising nourishment when cooked or boiled. You remember reading that medieval castles often relied on such ice cellars to extend the life of perishables during the harshest months. Without them, a siege could mean certain starvation even with stored grain. Scholars debate how effective these cellars truly were, whether the frozen produce retained flavor and nutrition or merely delayed decay, but the evidence of their strategic importance is clear. You move carefully, mindful that one slip could send a barrel crashing to the stone floor, spoiling its precious contents and perhaps inviting censure. The snow outside presses relentlessly against the walls, and small drifts accumulate near the cellar doors, reminding you of the world's indifference to the plight of the hungry. You open another barrel, this one containing salted fish from last week's discovery. The icy coating preserves the flesh, stiff and firm, a testament to both the harsh winter and human ingenuity. You pause, inhaling the briny scent, savoring the knowledge that tonight some will eat beyond mere gruel, and the cold has paradoxically become your ally. Thomas joins you carrying a basket of frost-covered root vegetables he had collected earlier. He brushes off excess snow and holds the basket out to you. Some for the fire pot. He whispers, his teeth chattering slightly, despite the layers of wool and fur. You nod, recognizing that teamwork, improvisation, and shared risk are as crucial here as any caloric content. Together, you begin the delicate process of preparing what will become tonight's meal, combining frost-hardened vegetables with salted fish and a splash of gruel broth. The fire crackles feebly in the hearth, providing both heat and a sense of security, and you carefully chip away at the ice coating each root, a meticulous labor that transforms frozen hardness into edible substance. You remember a peculiar account from a castle in Scandinavia, where servants reportedly used snow to cool wine while simultaneously preserving winter vegetables. Scholars argue whether such practices were widespread or isolated incidents, but the principle of dual-purpose management resonates deeply with you. You slice a parsnip, its interior crisp and sweet despite the frost, and toss it into the simmering cauldron, listening to the faint hiss as it meets the heated liquid. The sound is oddly comforting, a reminder that life persists even when the world seems frozen and indifferent. A stray mouse scuttles along the stone floor, slipping under a crate, and you watch with bemusement. Even the smallest creatures are adept at finding sustenance in icy conditions. Hunger gnaws at your awareness, but the warmth from the fire, combined with the anticipation of a meal, offers a fragile buffer against despair. You begin to add salted fish, cutting it into small pieces, each slice releasing a pungent, briny aroma that mingles with the earthy scent of thawing vegetables. The combination is strange, but undeniably nourishing, and you feel a measure of pride in your improvisation. The kitchen staff moves with quiet urgency, aware that any delay could mean the difference between a warm meal and continued suffering. You recall historical accounts describing snow suppers in northern European castles, where vegetables and salted meats were stored on ice and served directly from frost-laden cellars. Debates among historians question whether the practice preserved flavor or merely sustenance, yet the strategy clearly reflects adaptability in the face of winter scarcity. You stir the pot slowly, mindful of consistency and balance. Each movement, each careful addition, is both culinary and strategic, a way of ensuring that what little you have stretches as far as possible without compromising nourishment. The hiss of heated liquid and the faint pop of ice breaking into the cauldron provide a soundtrack to your labors, echoing softly against the stone walls. Outside, the snow thickens, pressing against shuttered windows and muffling distant footsteps. The cold is relentless, but inside, the combination of fire, ingenuity, and collected resources creates a fragile sanctuary. You taste a spoonful of the simmering mixture, the earthy sweetness of parsnips, and the briny tang of fish blending to create a warmth that spreads through your chest. Hunger eases slightly, replaced by the satisfaction of problem-solving and resource management. Mistress Alwyn oversees the preparations, moving among the staff with practiced efficiency, adjusting portions, checking seasoning, and offering guidance on rationing. Her presence steadies you. The knowledge and experience she brings transform scarcity into strategy. You divide the stew into portions, calculating carefully to ensure fairness and maximize nourishment. The act of rationing becomes ritualistic, a meditation on survival, a measure of how human ingenuity and cooperation can turn limited resources into sustenance for many. You pause to sip a small portion, savoring the combination of warmth, flavor, and accomplishment, and feel a momentary reprieve from the gnawing emptiness. Outside, the wind continues its relentless assault, Yet inside, the cellar, the fire, and your careful management of frozen provisions create a buffer, a fragile ecosystem of survival. You glance at Thomas, who grins faintly despite chattering teeth, and exchange a look that conveys shared relief and pride. You recall a quirky story about a servant who purportedly used layers of snow and ice to preserve vegetables during prolonged frost, claiming it improved flavor over time. Scholars still debate the veracity of this tale, but here it feels credible, practical, and entirely necessary. The night deepens, shadows lengthen, and the flickering firelight casts the cellar and kitchen in an amber glow, warming both body and spirit. Each spoonful of stew, each careful ration, each thawed vegetable represents resourcefulness, endurance, and the quiet triumph of human creativity over scarcity. Hunger persists, relentless, yet tempered by warmth, ingenuity, and the knowledge that even in the coldest winters, ice and snow can be allies rather than adversaries. You finish distributing portions, ensuring that each hand receives a fair share, and take a final sip of your own meal. The flavors are modest, but sustaining. The warmth spreads through your chest and fingers, a balm against the frigid stone surrounding you. In this moment, you realize that survival in the ice cellars is about more than calories. It is about morale, foresight, and the ability to transform adversity into sustenance. The snow outside continues to drift, indifferent and unyielding, yet within your careful labor has created warmth, nourishment, and a fragile sense of abundance. You clean your tools, set the last portion aside for the infirmary, and breathe deeply, inhaling the scent of thawing vegetables, briny fish, and lingering smoke. Tonight, the ice cellars have yielded sustenance, hope, and a quiet triumph over hunger and winter alike. You step back, feeling both exhaustion and satisfaction, knowing that the strategies, care, and resourcefulness of this night will carry you through until the next meal, the next challenge, and the next opportunity to survive in this cold, relentless world. You hear the first distant clatter of wheels against frozen stone and the echoing creak of chains that signal the drawbridge is lowering for the first time in weeks, and an unfamiliar thrill courses through your body. The wind carries scents of the outside world, fresh wood smoke, animals, and the faint, almost intoxicating aroma of bread baked in distant ovens. After weeks of rationing, scavenging, and surviving on scraps, even a simple gust of air laden with promise feels like a feast. You step cautiously toward the main gate, along with the other servants, careful not to slip on frost-glazed stones, and watch as supply carts roll into the courtyard, their wheels crunching over snow that has drifted thick and high against the castle walls. Horses stamp their hooves impatiently, blowing clouds of warm breath into the cold air, and the drivers shout orders, the words carrying excitement and relief. Your heart hammers in your chest. After so many days of ingenuity and endurance, you realize that survival will now be supplemented for the first time in weeks by abundance. The carts unload sacks of grain, barrels of salted meats, and crates of root vegetables, each item a tangible promise that the gnawing emptiness you have endured will finally be relieved. You feel a strange, almost surreal detachment, as though you have been living in a world apart, where every day was measured in small victories, and now the landscape has shifted abruptly. You remember chroniclers describing medieval sieges where the arrival of relief forces was met with jubilation bordering on disbelief, and how the mere sight of carts loaded with supplies could lift spirits more effectively than feasts themselves. Scholars debate how widespread such reactions were, suggesting either genuine relief or embellishment for dramatic effect. Yet watching the carts roll in now, the accounts feel entirely plausible. You move forward with others to help unload, feeling the weight of sacks of grain and crates of vegetables. The labor is heavy, but each movement feels celebratory, a physical manifestation of survival's culmination. The smell of freshly baked bread carried in from the carts is almost overwhelming. You close your eyes briefly, inhaling deeply, letting the scent fill the void left by weeks of rationing and hallucinatory feasts conjured in your mind. Mistress Alwen supervises with a quiet intensity, directing the distribution, ensuring that the most vulnerable, those weakened by prolonged deprivation, receive portions first. You carry sacks of barley to the storerooms, stacking them meticulously, aware that proper storage now will prevent loss and spoilage, extending the miracle of relief as far as possible. The courtyard is alive with activity. Servants, guards, and laborers coordinate in an almost choreographed dance, moving heavy carts, shifting barrels, and arranging supplies for storage. You glance at Thomas, who grins broadly, finally allowing himself to laugh freely without the constant tension of scarcity weighing on his shoulders. A faint warmth spreads through your chest, not just from the physical labor, but from the realization that the worst of the winter's hunger has finally passed. You recall the strategy discussions from earlier in the season about rationing, dividing scraps, and stretching meager resources, skills that have now become less immediately necessary, but whose practice instilled in you a deep respect for planning and perseverance. You set down a barrel of salted fish, now plentiful, and run a hand over the cask, feeling the rough wood and imagining how it would sustain dozens of meals in the days to come. Each barrel, each sack, each crate represents more than nourishment. It is proof that the endurance, ingenuity, and careful management of the past weeks were not in vain. You notice a group of nobles in the great hall, peering curiously at the servants moving supplies. Their expressions are a mixture of curiosity, mild amusement, and perhaps relief that the castle's internal order has been maintained. You recall stories of similar arrivals in history, where lords would find their castles functional and surviving not because of their oversight, but because of the hidden labor and resilience of their staff. Historians debate the frequency and scale of such events, but now you experience the truth firsthand. The quiet heroism of those behind the scenes ensures survival and stability. As you move through the courtyard, distributing grain to storerooms and overseeing barrels of salted meats, a sense of collective accomplishment settles over the assembled staff. The frost-bitten air feels lighter, the weight of weeks of scarcity lifting incrementally with each crate unloaded. You pause to take a breath, inhaling the mingled scents of horses, wood, and fresh provisions, and marvel at the surreal transformation. The castle, once a fortress of hunger and deprivation, now brims with the promise of real sustenance. Children peek from behind corners, drawn to the bustle, their eyes wide at the sight of so much food. Their laughter, tentative but genuine, echoes across the courtyard, a sound almost foreign in the long silence of rationing and restraint. You smile, thinking that in some ways these moments of joy and abundance are more nourishing than any single meal. You distribute portions to the infirmary, careful to ensure that the weak and sick receive priority. Each handful of grain, each salted fish, each root vegetable represents the delicate balance between sustenance and morale, a tangible testament to survival achieved through labor, strategy, and endurance. The cook, Mistress Alwen, supervises the preparation of a large communal stew, combining root vegetables, salted meats, and grains into a hearty, warming mixture. The aroma rises, thick and rich, filling the hall and courtyard, drawing the staff closer, momentarily uniting them in the celebration of abundance. You take a spoonful of the freshly prepared stew, its warmth and richness a stark contrast to the thin gruel and hallucinated feasts of prior weeks. The taste is overwhelming in its simplicity, nourishing not only the body but also the spirit, reinforcing the sense that perseverance has been rewarded. Outside, the snow continues to drift lazily, but its chill is now less menacing, mitigated by the labor, warmth, and newly acquired supplies. The staff share quiet words of relief, laughter, and camaraderie, a stark contrast to the hushed whispers and careful rationing of the days past. You notice Thomas lifting a small child, offering a spoonful of stew, the child's eyes lighting up at the warmth and taste. The moment crystallizes the profound importance of what has been achieved. Survival is not solely an individual accomplishment, but a communal one, reliant on foresight, cooperation, and ingenuity. You pause, watching the hustle and bustle, realizing that every action over the past weeks, from scavenging scraps to preserving frozen vegetables, from concocting broths to maintaining secret gardens, has culminated in this instant of tangible relief. The castle, resilient and enduring, stands as a testament to human resourcefulness, and you feel a quiet pride in your contribution to its continued function and survival. You sip from a small tin cup, filled with broth, thickened with root vegetables and salted fish, savoring warmth, texture, and the comforting sense of abundance. Hunger, which had been a relentless companion, now whispers rather than demands, softened by the sudden influx of provisions. You glance around at the staff, noting faces illuminated with smiles, relief, and cautious optimism. Each shared glance communicates gratitude, understanding, and mutual recognition of the trials endured and overcome. Historical records note similar scenes during periods of famine or siege. The sudden arrival of supplies transformed both morale and functionality, often in ways that secured the survival of entire households. Scholars debate the frequency and outcomes of such events. But here and now, the evidence is undeniable. You assist in distributing the final portions of grain and fish, carefully rationing to ensure fairness, and feel a rare sense of accomplishment. Even the most exhausted servants carry themselves with renewed purpose, buoyed by the certainty that the immediate threat of hunger has passed. You pause by a stack of barrels, touching the rough wood, and imagine the weeks of ingenuity, careful rationing, and patience that have led to this bounty. Each grain, each fish, each root vegetable represents both a triumph over scarcity and a lesson in the persistence of human resourcefulness. The snow outside continues its gentle descent, but within, warmth, sustenance, and human ingenuity dominate. You lift a spoonful of stew one final time, savoring its richness, and realize that the weeks of struggle, the hallucinations of imagined feasts, the meticulous rationing of scraps, and the hidden efforts in the ice cellars have all converged to create this rare and satisfying moment, a true meal, shared and sufficient, a celebration of survival achieved through resilience, collaboration, and foresight. The courtyard hums with quiet activity, the warmth from hearth and effort radiating outward. You take a final breath, savoring the combined aromas, textures, and flavors, knowing that this day marks a turning point, the end of acute hunger, the validation of labor, and the reaffirmation that human ingenuity, persistence, and solidarity can overcome even the harshest winters. You set down your spoon, feeling both physical satiation and profound relief, watching as the castle, once a fortress of scarcity and deprivation, now hums with life, abundance, and cautious optimism. You sit quietly in the great hall, the long tables finely laden with the bounty that weeks of scarcity had made a distant dream. The fire crackles warmly in the hearth, its light flickering across polished wood and stone, and for the first time in what feels like an eternity, the hall smells not of smoke, ash, and desperation, but of bread freshly baked, root vegetables simmered to perfection, and the rich briny aroma of salted fish finely prepared with care. You lift a spoon, hesitating just slightly, aware that each morsel you taste carries the weight of survival, history, and the ingenuity that brought it here. Every bite is a mixture of textures, temperatures, and flavors that you have longed for but could only imagine in earlier weeks. The soft warmth of bread, the subtle sweetness of roasted root vegetables, and the delicate, firm texture of fish that had once sat forgotten in a dark cellar. You pause to breathe in the atmosphere, letting the warmth and aroma mingle with the lingering chill of winter, and feel a quiet satisfaction that your body, mind, and spirit are all nourished simultaneously. Thomas sits across from you, spoon poised over his plate, eyes reflecting the same relief and awe that you feel. He chuckles softly, shaking his head at the improbability of it all, and you smile in return, both of you silently acknowledging the shared endurance that brought you to this moment. You remember the weeks of rationing, the secret gardens beneath the castle walls, the careful scraping of bones for broth, the creative alchemy of moldy barley, candle wax, and softened leather, all the strategies, small victories, and inventive measures that allowed life to continue in the face of near-constant hunger. Scholars debate the prevalence of these survival methods, some arguing that chroniclers exaggerated the extremes, others citing archaeological evidence of ingenuity in medieval kitchens during prolonged shortages. Here, in this warm hall, the evidence is tangible. The food before you, the energy returning to tired limbs, the light in weary eyes. You lift a piece of roasted root, savoring its subtle caramelized flavor, and realize that even the smallest vegetables now carry the triumph of endurance. Each bite is infused not only with sustenance, but with the history of the hands that planted, harvested, and preserved them, of the minds that rationed, inventoried, and innovated to ensure life continued. Outside, the snow has settled into soft drifts, muffling the world beyond the castle walls and making the hall feel like an insulated sanctuary where warmth, nourishment, and community reign supreme. You glance around, noticing the expressions of your fellow servants, the weariness slowly lifting, replaced with smiles, murmurs of contentment, and quiet laughter. Hunger, once a relentless companion, is now a memory softened by fullness and the reassurance of abundance. You sip a small cup of broth, enriched with vegetables and salted fish, feeling the liquid's warmth spread through your chest and extremities. The firelight catches in your eyes, and you let yourself dwell on the sensation of relief, the pleasure of eating freely, without calculation or rationing, a luxury that has been rare and precious. A mouse scurries at the corner of the room, drawn perhaps by the smells of the feast. You watch with amusement rather than fear or concern, a small reminder that life persists in all forms, and that survival is not limited to human ingenuity alone. Thomas nudges your elbow lightly, and you exchange a grin, both of you recognizing that these moments of shared sustenance and quiet celebration are rarer and more meaningful than any grand banquet of the nobility. You think back to the months of hardship, the hallucinations conjured by starvation, the thin gruel, the hidden caches, and the laborious preparations in the ice cellars, all steps leading to this tangible moment of triumph. The transition from scarcity to abundance is not merely physical, but deeply psychological. Relief permeates not only your stomach, but your spirit, reinforcing resilience, hope, and the knowledge that careful planning, creativity, and endurance can overcome even the harshest winters. You reach for a slice of bread, tearing it slowly, letting the texture and aroma fill your senses. Each morsel is imbued with gratitude for the harvest, for the wisdom of your mentors, for the perseverance that brought you to this table. You feel an almost sacred sense of ceremony in eating, as if each bite honors those who endured before you, those who toiled unseen to preserve life in the shadow of scarcity. Outside, the wind continues its gentle howl against the castle walls, snow glinting in the moonlight, yet inside, warmth and abundance hold sway. You glance at Mistress Alwyn, who watches the room with quiet pride, her eyes reflecting both relief and satisfaction. Her foresight and leadership, combined with the resourcefulness of the staff, have transformed a potentially catastrophic famine into a story of triumph, ingenuity, and resilience. You taste a morsel of salted fish, its flavor now harmonized with the broth and vegetables, a far cry from the bitter, briny reminders of weeks past. Each bite is a reminder of the miracle of preservation, the careful planning of past days, and the ingenuity required to stretch meager supplies into a feast. Conversation rises softly around you, laughter threading through stories of past trials, the imaginative hallucinations of hunger, and the shared understanding of what has been endured. You sip broth once more, letting the warmth settle and soften lingering tension in your shoulders. Even the simplest foods, bread, fish, root vegetables carry the resonance of endurance, community, and human ingenuity. The fire crackles, illuminating faces worn but not broken, and you allow yourself to lean back, savoring not only the sustenance but the collective relief that floods the room. You reflect on the lessons learned, the importance of meticulous rationing, the value of hidden caches, the creativity required to transform even spoiled or unconventional ingredients into sustenance and the quiet satisfaction of survival against the odds. Each bite taken is an affirmation of those lessons, a tangible acknowledgement that endurance, collaboration, and ingenuity can triumph over scarcity. The hall is warm, full, and alive, a stark contrast to the cold, hushed spaces of the castle during the long weeks of deprivation. You lift a small piece of bread, closing your eyes as you taste it, and allow the memory of hunger, hallucinations, frozen vegetables, and scavenged scraps to wash over you, blending with the reality of abundance now. Thomas raises a spoon in silent salute, and you mirror the gesture, an unspoken acknowledgement of the shared journey from deprivation to fulfillment. Outside, snow drifts against the walls, indifferent to the human struggles within, yet inside, the warmth of the fire, the richness of the food, and the camaraderie of those around you create a sanctuary where endurance is celebrated and hope is restored. You finish the final spoonful of stew, savoring the layered flavors, and feel a sense of completion, the weeks of deprivation, ingenuity, and patience culminating in this tangible, shared feast. Hunger has been temporarily subdued, replaced with warmth, contentment, and a profound appreciation for the fragile, delicate process that made this meal possible. You glance around one final time, taking in the faces, the warmth, and the sense of accomplishment, and realize that these moments, rare, fleeting, and hard-earned, define survival more than any single act of bravery or luxury ever could. You lean back, savoring the satisfaction, the quiet pride, and the enduring knowledge that perseverance, creativity, and cooperation have brought you, and all those who endured with you, safely to this table. The hall hums softly with conversation, laughter, and the gentle clatter of utensils, a symphony of relief after weeks of tension and hunger. And as you finish the last morsel, letting warmth and contentment settle through your body and spirit, you recognize the fragile, fleeting miracle that this feast represents: life restored, energy replenished, and hope rekindled. You exhale slowly, the tension of weeks melting in the warmth of both fire and food, feeling a profound, calm satisfaction that is almost dizzying in its simplicity and completeness. Outside, the night presses against the stone walls, but inside you are safe, nourished, and at peace. The snow falls softly, the fire flickers gently, and you allow yourself to rest, knowing that for the first time in many weeks, the immediate struggle for sustenance has been overcome, and that resilience, patience, and ingenuity have triumphed. You lean back in your chair, the firelight dancing across the stone walls, and for the first time, the castle feels less like a fortress of deprivation and more like a sanctuary of warmth. Every bite you took, every morsel shared, every painstakingly preserved root and salted fish now lingers in memory and stomach alike, soothing the weeks of relentless hunger. Outside, the snow drifts silently, covering the courtyard in soft white, a quiet witness to the endurance and ingenuity that carried you through. You breathe deeply, letting the warmth of the hearth seep through your frozen limbs, and notice the subtle satisfaction settling over the faces around you. Servants who once scoured for scraps now smile with the rare comfort of abundance, their eyes reflecting relief, pride, and cautious joy. Thomas sits nearby, spoon in hand, still marveling at the miracle of the day, and you exchange a quiet nod of shared triumph, recognizing that survival was never just about food, but about cooperation, creativity, and patience. The hall hums softly with murmurs of contentment, a gentle symphony that replaces the earlier whispers of fear and scarcity. Your mind drifts through the past weeks, the secret gardens beneath the walls, the ice cellar harvests, the scraping of bones for broth, and the imaginative hallucinations born of hunger, all now chapters of a story with a happier ending, even if tenuously so. You sip the last warm broth, feeling it spread comforting warmth from chest to fingertips, and a profound calm settles over you. In this moment, the relentless winter feels softer, the gnawing of empty stomachs fades, and the flickering firelight becomes a lullaby. Your body is nourished, your spirit steadied, and the castle, once a symbol of scarcity, now offers comfort, community, and hope. You close your eyes, letting the warmth, the shared laughter, and the satisfaction of survival carry you gently toward rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.